There is a number attached to the Three Gorges Dam that is so large it stops meaning anything the moment you hear it. In the worst of a great flood, in a single week, the largest dam on Earth can release more water than most rivers on the entire planet carry in an entire year. Not a big flood's worth of water. Not a lot of water. An entire year of a normal river drained past a single wall of concrete in 7 days. And then, if the flood continues, it does it again the next week. The mind hears that and slides right off it, because human beings are simply not built to comprehend quantities on that scale. And so the number gets filed away as just another impressive fact about a big dam. It's true, staggering, almost frightening meaning lost in the sheer size of it. But the meaning matters, because the scale is the story. Everything about the Three Gorges Dam, its power to control the river, its danger to the cities below, its role in the life of a nation, comes down to the sheer planetary quantity of water it commands. This is a structure that does not deal in the volumes of ordinary human engineering, the reservoirs and canals and pipes we can more or less picture. It deals in volumes that belong to geography itself, to rivers and seas and the water cycle of a continent, quantities so vast that to move them, to hold them, to release them, is to operate at the scale of nature rather than of people. And when a human structure operates at the scale of nature, extraordinary things become possible, and extraordinary things become dangerous, because the same magnitude that lets the dam tame one of the world's great rivers is the magnitude that, when it is released, comes down on the cities below with a force that no human defense was ever built to withstand. So this is a story about scale, about a number too large to feel, and about what it actually means to release more water in a week than most rivers carry in a year. It is going to build that number up, piece by piece, from a single cubic meter to the incomprehensible torrent that pours past the dam in a great flood, because the only way to truly grasp what the Three Gorges Dam does is to construct the scale in your mind, one comprehensible step at a time, until you arrive at a quantity that is not comprehensible at all, and understand, finally, why a structure that moves that much water is one of the most awesome and one of the most frightening things human beings have ever built. Because the water it released this week is real, and the scale of it is real, and once you actually feel that scale, you can never quite look at that dam, or at any river, the same way again. Before we build the number, stand for a moment with someone who has actually stood in front of it, because the scale is not only a fact on a page, it is a thing that living people have witnessed with their own eyes and never forgotten. There is a man named Chin who spent years working near the dam, and he has described what it is to be present when the great gates open in a flood. He talks about arriving on an ordinary morning, the river below moving quietly, the turbines humming their low steady hum, everything calm and almost gentle, the tamed Yangtze sliding past as if it had always been so obedient. And then, he says, the order comes to open the spillways, because upstream the rain has been falling for days over an area the size of a country, and the water is arriving faster than the reservoir can hold. He describes the first gate opening, and the sound arriving before anything else. A low concussion you feel in the chest before the mind understands it, and then the water, not falling, but exploding outward, a jet of river blasted into the air under a pressure that turns water into something closer to a solid. And the mist rising in a wall, and within minutes the sun over the gorge dimmed behind a cloud of the dam's own making. He says that no matter how many times he saw it, it never once felt normal, that every single time some animal part of his brain understood that it was in the presence of something it was never meant to survive being near, and that the feeling was not excitement, but a kind of holy terror, the body recognizing a force on the scale of the sky. That is the human end of the number we are about to build. A man standing on concrete, watching the annual flow of the world's rivers thunder past him in an afternoon, and feeling, in his bones, that he is very small. Hold him in your mind as we count, because when we reach the end of the arithmetic, it is his terror, not the digits, that is the truth of it. Now let me start by admitting the problem directly, because it is the reason the number means so little at first. Human beings cannot comprehend large quantities. We evolved to deal with the scale of our own lives, a handful of objects, a group of people, a distance we could walk, a volume of water we could carry or drink or wade through. Beyond that, our sense of quantity simply fails. 1,000 and 1,000,000 and 1,000,000,000 all register, emotionally, as roughly the same thing, which is to say as a lot, even though 1,000,000,000 is 1,000 times 1,000,000, and the difference between them is the difference between a stack of bills as tall as a chair and a stack as tall as a mountain. When a number gets large enough, it stops being a quantity we feel and becomes just a word, big. And every big number feels about the same. This is why the statistics about the Three Gorges Dam wash over people. Tens of thousands of cubic meters per second, tens of billions of cubic meters of storage. These are just words that mean large, and the mind cannot tell the difference between them and merely big numbers, because it has no experience of quantities that size to compare them to. So to actually understand the dam, we have to cheat our own limitations, to build the scale up from something we can feel, step by step, refusing to let the mind slide off, until we arrive at the real magnitude with our sense of proportion intact. That is the only way to make a planetary number mean something to a human mind, and it is worth the effort. Because on the other side of that effort is a genuine understanding of one of the most staggering things on Earth. So let us start with something you can actually picture, the basic building block of all of it, a single cubic meter of water. A cubic meter is a cube of water a little over 3 feet on each side, about the size of a large kitchen appliance or a small piece of furniture. It holds 1,000 liters, roughly the amount of water in 5 or 6 full bathtubs. And it is heavy, because water is heavy. A single cubic meter of water weighs a metric ton, 1,000 kilograms, about the weight of a small car. Hold that in your mind, because it is the atom from which the whole incomprehensible number is built. 1 cube of water, 3 feet on a side, as heavy as a car. You can picture that. You can imagine lifting it, or rather failing to lift it. Imagine the mass of it, the weight of a small vehicle compressed into a cube you could sit on. That is 1 cubic meter, 1 ton, the single grain from which the mountain is made. Everything that follows is just this, multiplied. But we will keep coming back to it, this 1 car-sized, car-weighted cube of water, because it is the only handle the human mind has on the quantities to come. Whenever the numbers threaten to become just words again, return to this, a cube of water the size of an appliance, as heavy as a car. Now we start counting them, because the dam does not deal in single cubic meters. It deals in cubic meters per second, and the rate at which it can release them is the first number that starts to break the mind. In a great flood, the Three Gorges Dam can release water at a rate of tens of thousands of cubic meters every single second. Sit with the units, not per hour, not per minute, per second. In one heavy flood release, something on the order of 40,000, 50,000, In extreme conditions, even more. Cubic meters of water pass the dam every second. So take that 1 cube, the appliance-sized, car-heavy cube of water, and now imagine tens of thousands of them pouring past a single point every second. 40,000 cars worth of water, 50,000, gone past the wall in the time it takes to say the word second, and then another 40 or 50,000 in the next second, and the next, and the next, without pause, for days. The human mind cannot hold 40,000 cars. It cannot hold 40,000 of anything as a felt quantity. But it can hold the idea of one car-sized cube, and it can understand, in principle, that there are tens of thousands of them crossing the line every second, and in that gap between what it can picture and what it knows is true lives the first real glimpse of the scale. Every second, a small city's worth of cars, rendered in water, thunders past the dam, and the flood does not last a second. It lasts for days. To make that rate real, let us compare it to something famous, something that is itself a symbol of the overwhelming power of moving water. Niagara Falls. Niagara Falls is one of the most powerful waterfalls in the world, a wall of water so immense and so loud that people travel from across the globe to stand near it and feel the ground shake and the mist rise. To be humbled by the raw force of that much water falling. Over the falls flows, on average, something on the order of a couple of thousand cubic meters of water per second, and that modest-sounding number produces one of the great spectacles of the natural world. A thunder you feel in your chest, a force that has carved a gorge through solid rock over thousands of years. Now hold that in your mind, the overwhelming, world-famous power of Niagara, and understand this. In a heavy flood release, the Three Gorges Dam passes water at 15, 20, in the most extreme conditions, closer to 30 times the flow of Niagara Falls, not for the length of a visit, but continuously, hour after hour, day after day. Imagine standing at Niagara and feeling that power, and then imagine 20 Niagaras, 30 Niagaras, all pouring past a single dam at once, and holding that flow steady for days on end. That is the release rate we are talking about. The most overwhelming waterfall most people will ever see, multiplied by 20 or 30, sustained, from a structure built by human hands. When you next picture the Three Gorges Dam opening its gates, do not picture a big waterfall. Picture a whole row of the world's greatest waterfalls, side by side, all roaring at once, and you will be closer to the truth. Before we go to the weekly total, let us pin the rate down with a few more everyday containers, because Niagara is itself so large that comparing one incomprehensible thing to another does not fully help. So bring it down to objects you have actually stood beside. An Olympic swimming pool, the kind you have seen at the Summer Games. The great 50-meter pool that looks enormous when you stand at its edge and think about swimming its length, holds about 2,500 cubic meters of water. That whole pool, the entire volume of it, top to bottom, end to end, is filled by the Three Gorges Dam's flood release in a fraction of a single second. Read that again and let it land. Every second, in a heavy release, the dam pushes out enough water to fill 15, 20 of those Olympic pools, one after another, and it does it again the next second and the next. Picture a row of 20 Olympic pools, and every single second, all 20 are filled and emptied past the dam, and then filled and emptied again, endlessly, for days. Or think of it in the tallest terms you know. A cubic meter is a ton. Tens of thousands of tons per second means that in the time it takes a traffic light to change, the dam has released the weight of a large naval fleet in water, and in a single minute it has released more mass of water than every vehicle in a large city weighs put together. And in an hour, a quantity of water whose weight exceeds that of everything human beings have ever built in a major metropolis. And none of that is the week. That is 1 hour. The rate alone, before we ever multiply it out to the week, is already past the edge of what the mind can carry, which is exactly why the mind must be given these handholds: the pool, the fleet, the city of cars rendered in water, so that it does not simply give up and file the whole thing away as merely large. Because it is not merely large, it is a rate at which the ordinary containers of human life, the pools and trucks and city blocks, are swallowed whole every second without the flow so much as flickering. Now let us do the thing the mind resists, and multiply the rate by the time to get the volume released in a week, because that is where the number becomes truly monstrous. There are about 600,000 seconds in a week, and if, through a sustained flood, the dam is releasing on the order of tens of thousands of cubic meters every one of those seconds, then the total volume of water released across the week is those two numbers multiplied together, and the result is a quantity in the tens of billions of cubic meters. Tens of billions of tons of water released past a single wall in 7 days. We have lost the ability to picture it now, and that is expected, but hold on to the building block. Tens of billions of those car-sized, car-weighted cubes of water. Enough cubes that if you line them up, they would stretch not around a city or a country, but multiple times around the entire planet. All of it passing the dam in a single week. This is a volume that has left the realm of human engineering entirely and entered the realm of geography. It is not a reservoir's worth of water or a lake's worth of water. It is a fraction of a great river's entire annual flow, moved in days, by choice, through a set of gates. The number is beyond feeling, but its meaning is not, and its meaning is this. In the span of a single week, this one structure handles a quantity of water that belongs on the scale of continents and seasons, not of dams and days, and it does so on command, opening and closing the outlets that decide the fate of that planetary flood. And now we can finally make sense of the claim in its full form that this weekly release exceeds what most rivers carry in an entire year. Because it is not hyperbole, it is arithmetic. Most of the rivers on Earth are not giants like the Yangtze. They are modest, ordinary rivers, the streams and rivers that most people have actually seen, carrying a flow measured in the tens, hundreds, or low thousands of cubic meters per second at most. And over the course of a full year, such a river carries a total volume that, while large by human standards, is small compared to the Titans. When you add up the entire annual flow of a typical river, all the water it carries past a given point across all 12 months, you get a number that for the great majority of the world's rivers is smaller than the volume the Three Gorges Dam can release in a single flood week. This is the astonishing truth hiding in the comparison. The dam, in 7 days of heavy release, moves more water than most rivers move in 365 days. A year of an ordinary river, its entire annual journey to the sea, its spring floods and its summer flows, and its winter trickle all added together, is less water than this one dam passes in a week when the great flood comes. The Yangtze is one of the largest rivers on the planet, and the Three Gorges Dam sits astride it, and in a flood it commands flows that dwarf the total yearly output of the countless smaller rivers that most of humanity lives beside. That is the scale of the thing, not a big river, a structure that, in a week, outflows the annual life of most rivers on Earth. And to hold that much water back in the first place, to be able to release it, the dam impounds a body of water that is a wonder of scale all on its own, an artificial inland sea. Behind the Three Gorges Dam stretches its reservoir, a body of water that reaches back hundreds of miles up the drowned gorges of the Yangtze, holding, at full capacity, tens of billions of cubic meters of water. That is the reserve, the stored quantity, the savings account of water that the dam manages, and it is on the same monstrous scale as everything else about the structure. Filling it required drowning entire valleys and towns and relocating more than 1 million people from land that would vanish beneath the rising water. The sheer mass of that impounded water is so great that scientists have noted that concentrating it in one place has measurable effects, an almost unimaginable quantity of water gathered behind a single wall. This is the pool from which the great releases are drawn, and the space into which the great floods are caught. And here is the humbling part. Even that enormous reservoir, even tens of billions of cubic meters of storage, can be filled by a large enough flood, which is precisely why the dam is sometimes forced to release at those monstrous rates, because the flood pouring in exceeds even the vast space available to hold it. The reservoir is one of the largest bodies of water ever assembled by human hands, and the floods it must manage are large enough to fill it and force it to pass the excess along. That is the true measure of the scale we are dealing with, that even an inland sea of stored water is not always big enough, and the water must be released at rates that outrun the yearly flow of most of the rivers in the world. And there is one more way to feel the size of that reservoir, which is to imagine emptying it at the release rate, because it tells you something about how the dam actually holds the line against a flood. If the reservoir holds tens of billions of cubic meters, and the dam releases at tens of thousands of cubic meters per second, then you can divide one by the other and ask how long it would take. At full flood release, to drain the whole thing, and the answer comes out not in hours, but in many days of continuous, monstrous discharge. That is the buffer, the margin, the reason the dam can do anything useful against a flood at all. When the great rains come and the river arrives faster than it can be sent through, the reservoir absorbs the difference. Its level climbing foot by foot as it banks the excess water in that enormous inland space, buying the city's downstream time, shaving the deadly peak off the flood so that what passes below is less than what arrived above. But that buffer is finite, and this is the part that should make the hair stand up, because a flood large enough and long enough can fill even that day's deep reserve. And once it is full, the shaving stops, and the dam must pass along whatever comes, gallon for gallon, ton for ton. So the reservoir is not an infinite shield. It is a bathtub, an enormous, valley-drowning, million-person displacing bathtub, but a bathtub all the same, and the floods it faces are large enough to fill it and force the taps wide open. The scale of the storage and the scale of the release are locked together in a grim arithmetic, and the outcome of a great flood depends on whether the reserve runs out before the rain does, a race between an inland sea and the sky, decided in the tens of billions of cubic meters, with the cities of the plain waiting downstream for the answer. Let me put you at the dam itself when the great release is happening, because the human scale of the spectacle is worth feeling before we go further. On an ordinary day, the water leaves the dam quietly, funneled through the turbines to make electricity, and you would hardly know the scale of what is passing. But when the flood comes, and the reservoir is full, and the water must be sent through, the operators open the spillway gates, and the character of the place transforms into something out of a nightmare of power. The water comes through the open gates, not as a flow, but as an eruption, great roaring jets of it blasting out under the immense pressure of the reservoir behind, striking the river below with a force that throws up a permanent cloud of mist hundreds of feet into the air and produces a roar you can feel in your body from far away. When many gates are open at once, the entire face of the dam becomes a wall of exploding white water, an almost solid curtain of released river, and the sound is not a sound so much as a physical presence, a thunder without end. People who have stood near it describe it as one of the most overwhelming things they have ever witnessed. A display of raw power that makes the human body feel like nothing at all, and they are watching only a fraction of the full release, only the part they can see from the shore. This is what tens of thousands of cubic meters per second looks like when it reaches the daylight, an eruption of water, so vast and so violent that it generates its own weather and its own thunder, a permanent, roaring waterfall of released river, made and controlled by human hands, pouring the annual flow of most of the world's rivers past your feet in a matter of days. And it is worth being clear about why the dam must ever release water at such a scale, because it is not a choice made lightly. It is a response to a flood that is itself almost beyond belief. The dam releases at these monstrous rates because the water flowing into its reservoir during the greatest floods arrives at rates just as monstrous. The Yangtze drains an enormous basin, and when the great rains come and soak that entire vast region, the water that pours off the land and down the river into the reservoir can arrive at rates of tens of thousands of cubic meters per second, filling even the dam's enormous flood storage. And once the reservoir is full, the arithmetic is inescapable, because whatever flows into a full reservoir must flow out. So if the flood is pouring in at 50,000 cubic meters per second, the dam must eventually release at something approaching that same rate, or else let the reservoir overtop and threaten the structure itself. So the monstrous release is really a monstrous flood passing through, the dam catching what it can and passing along the rest, the sheer scale of the water forcing the sheer scale of the release. This is the humbling truth beneath all the engineering. The dam is one of the mightiest structures ever built, and even so, the floods it must handle are on a scale that can fill its reservoir and force it to pass along quantities of water that outrun the yearly output of most rivers on Earth. The scale of the release is a measure of the scale of the flood, and the scale of the flood is a measure of the raw power of the sky over a continent-sized watershed, a power that even the greatest dam can only manage, never truly master. This is not a hypothetical, and that is worth sitting with, because the great floods that force these releases are not imagined scenarios. They are events that have already happened, within living memory more than once. In the summer of 1998, before the dam was even finished, the Yangtze rose in a catastrophic flood that inundated vast regions of central China, drove millions from their homes, and killed thousands, a disaster seared into the national memory and one of the central arguments for finishing the dam in the first place. And in the summer of 2020, with the dam long complete and standing guard, the Yangtze Basin was hammered by weeks of relentless rain, and the inflow into the reservoir climbed to rates on the order of tens of thousands of cubic meters per second, some of the highest since the dam began operating, forcing the operators to open gate after gate and send those monstrous flows downstream even, as they held back as much as the reservoir could bank. Cities along the river watched their levels climb toward record marks. Tens of millions of people lived under evacuation orders and sandbag dikes, and the whole apparatus of the state bent toward the single task of managing water on a scale that dwarfs anything most nations ever face. So when we talk about releasing more water in a week than most rivers carry in a year, we are not spinning a thought experiment for its own sake. We are describing something the operators of that dam have actually had to do. Gates open, mist rising, the reservoir brimming, the downstream cities holding their breath. A real week in a real year when the largest structure on Earth was pushed toward the limits of what it was built to manage, and it has happened more than once, and under a warming sky, it will happen again, larger. The number is not a curiosity. It is a description of a recurring emergency, and the people who live below the dam know it in a way the rest of the world, reading the statistic and sliding off it, does not. Now let us follow that released water downstream, because moving that much water does not happen without consequence, and the scale of the release becomes the scale of the danger. All of that water, tens of thousands of cubic meters per second, tens of billions of cubic meters across the week, does not vanish once it passes the dam. It goes down the river toward the cities and the farms and the tens of millions of people who live on the plains below. And a flow on that scale is not a gentle thing. It fills the river to the tops of its dikes and beyond, presses against the flood walls with the weight of a moving sea, and where the defenses cannot hold, pours over or through them into the streets and homes and fields. The same magnitude that makes the release so awesome to witness at the dam makes it so dangerous when it arrives downstream. Because the cities below were built to pass a certain amount of water, and a release on this scale can exceed that amount, sending the excess where it has nowhere to go but into the low places where people live. So the scale is not just a spectacle or a statistic. It is the direct measure of the threat, because to release more water in a week than most rivers carry in a year is to send a quantity down the river that the downstream simply cannot always absorb, and the flooding that follows is the scale of the release made manifest in drowned streets and evacuated millions and ruined farmland. The number that was too large to feel becomes, downstream, a disaster too large to ignore, the abstract magnitude of the release transformed into the concrete magnitude of the flood. To feel that danger the way the people below feel it, picture a woman named May in a town on the plain hundreds of miles downstream, where the Yangtze is no longer a gorge cutting through mountains, but a broad, slow river running between raised dikes above the level of the fields and streets around it. She has lived her whole life beside that river, and she has learned to read it the way her parents and grandparents did, watching the color of the water and the height of it against the marks on the dike, knowing that in the flood season, the river is a neighbor to be respected, and, in the worst years, feared. When the great releases come from far upstream, she does not see the dam or its exploding gates or its wall of mist. What she sees is the river rising, day after day, climbing the inside of the dike, the water turning brown and fast and heavy, pressing against the barrier that is the only thing standing between that moving mass and her home, which sits, she knows, below the level of the river's surface when it runs high. She watches the volunteers and soldiers pile sandbags along the top, watches the seepage darken the base of the dike, and she understands, in a way no statistic could teach her, exactly what tens of thousands of cubic meters per second means, because it means the water is now higher than her roof would be if the dike were not there, held back by a wall of earth and human effort, and she knows that somewhere upstream a set of gates decided how much of that water would come and how fast. That is where the incomprehensible number finally becomes comprehensible, not at the dam, but in a town on the plain, in the eyes of a woman watching a brown river climb a wall above her house, feeling the full meaning of the scale and the tightening of her own chest. The volume that was too large to picture is, to her, simply the difference between a dry floor and a drowned one, decided far away, arriving as a wall of water she can only watch and pray against. And there is another kind of scale bound up in all this water, one that reveals just how much raw energy these quantities carry, because the dam is not only the largest water mover, but the largest power station on Earth. The same water that pours through the dam can be run through its turbines, and the energy it generates is on the same colossal scale as everything else about the structure. The Three Gorges Dam is the largest hydroelectric power station in the world, generating an enormous amount of electricity, and it does so by capturing the energy of that vast quantity of water falling through the height of the dam. Think about what that means. The energy in the moving water is so great that harnessing even a portion of it makes the world's single biggest power plant. This is another way of feeling the scale, because energy and water and mass are all bound together, and the raw power contained in tens of thousands of cubic meters of water per second, each cubic meter a ton, all of it falling through the height of the dam, is staggering, enough to light cities, enough to power a huge share of a region. When the water is released through the spillways instead of the turbines, that same colossal energy is simply dissipated into the river below, into the roar and the mist and the churning. An amount of raw power thrown away in a great flood release that could have run a nation, discarded because the water must go, and there is more of it than even the largest power station can use. The energy scale and the water scale are the same scale, seen two ways, and both of them are almost beyond comprehension. The energy of a continent's rainfall gathered and released past a single wall. There is one more comparison that turns the whole thing over and shows you its most unsettling face, and it is this. We have been measuring the dam against rivers and waterfalls and swimming pools, human landmarks and natural ones, and every time the dam has come out larger. But the truest comparison is not to any single river or fall. It is to the rain itself. All of the water the dam releases came, ultimately, from the sky, from storms sweeping across a watershed the size of a large country, dropping their moisture over mountains and forests and farmland, gathering into streams and creeks and tributaries, and finally into the great river that feeds the reservoir. So when the dam releases the annual flow of most rivers in a single week, what it is really doing is passing along the concentrated rainfall of an entire continent-sized region, collected by the land and funneled into one channel and delivered to one wall of concrete, which then decides its fate. The dam, in that sense, is not competing with rivers at all. It is standing in for the sky, taking the water the atmosphere delivers to a vast region and holding it briefly in human hands before letting it go. And that is the thought that should stay with you, because it locates the true scale of the thing, not in engineering, but in weather. And the raw water budget of a subcontinent, a quantity that has always belonged to clouds and seasons and the deep machinery of the climate. We built a structure large enough to intercept a meaningful share of that, to catch the rain of a region behind a single barrier and meter it out through gates. And in doing so, we placed ourselves, for the first time in history, in the position of the sky, responsible for water on a scale that was never before anyone's responsibility at all, because it was never before within anyone's power. That is what the number finally means. Not a big dam, not a strong river, but a human structure standing in the place where the weather used to stand alone, holding the rain of a continent in its hands and deciding, week by flooding week, when to let it fall. So step back now, with the scale finally built up in your mind, and consider what it means that human beings have made a structure that commands water on this magnitude, because it is a profound and unsettling thing. For almost all of human history, quantities of water like this belonged entirely to nature, to the great rivers and the seasons and the storms, utterly beyond human control, forces that people could only flee from or pray to. And then, in the span of a few decades, we built a structure that could catch and hold and release those quantities on command, that could take a flood on the scale of continents and decide through a set of gates when and how fast to let it pass. That is an almost godlike power, the ability to command water at the scale of geography, and it is a genuine triumph, one of the great engineering achievements of our species. But it is also a profound vulnerability, because to command such quantities is to be responsible for them, to hold back a weight of water that, if it were ever released all at once, would be a catastrophe beyond imagining, and to be forced, in the greatest floods, to pass along volumes that the world below cannot fully absorb. We have taken a portion of nature's greatest power into human hands. And in doing so, we have taken on both nature's capability and nature's danger, concentrated behind a single wall, dependent on that wall holding and on those gates being managed correctly, forever. The scale that makes the dam a wonder is the scale that makes it a peril, and the two cannot be separated, because they are the same magnitude, the same monstrous quantity of water, seen as achievement and seen as threat. And this is not a static situation, because the scale of the floods the dam must handle is growing, which means the scale of the releases will grow with it. The climate is warming, and a warmer atmosphere holds and delivers more moisture, which means heavier and more extreme rainfall over the great watershed that feeds the Yangtze, which means larger floods pouring into the reservoir, which means the dam will be forced more often to release at those monstrous rates that outrun the yearly flow of most rivers. The scale that already strains comprehension is on a trajectory to grow, the floods getting bigger, the releases getting larger, the quantities of water the dam must command climbing higher as the century goes on. So the number that is already too large to feel, more water in a week than most rivers carry in a year, is not a ceiling, but a waypoint, a magnitude that the changing climate is pushing upward toward releases even greater, floods even larger, a scale even further beyond the human capacity to grasp. The dam was built to command the water of a great river, and the great river, under a warming sky, is becoming greater and more violent, so that the structure must reach deeper into its monstrous capabilities more often, releasing more, holding back more, operating ever closer to the limits of what even it can manage. The scale is not fixed. It is rising, along with the sky's growing power to deliver water to the land, and the dam must rise to meet it, release by monstrous release. Stand on the Three Gorges Dam on a calm day, the water flowing smoothly and quietly through, the turbines humming, the mighty Yangtze seemingly tamed and peaceful, and it is almost impossible to believe that this same structure, in the great floods, commands water on a scale that belongs to continents and seasons rather than to human hands. But the number is real, and now you can feel it. In a single week, in a great flood, this one wall of concrete releases more water than most rivers on Earth carry in an entire year. Tens of billions of tons of it, tens of thousands of car-sized, car-weighted cubes every second, the flow of dozens of Niagaras sustained for days. An entire year of an ordinary river drained past a single point in 7. It is a magnitude that our minds can only reach by building it up from the small and comprehensible, and that even then we can hold only as a kind of awe, a sense of standing before something that operates at the scale of nature itself. and that awe should carry a shiver in it. Because to command water on that scale is to hold both a wonder and a weapon, a triumph of human power and a concentration of natural danger, poured past our cities on command, growing larger as the climate warms, a monstrous quantity of water gathered behind a single wall and released, week after flooding week, at rates that dwarf the rivers of the world. The Three Gorges Dam released more water this week than most rivers carry in a year. Now you know what that actually means, and knowing it, you can never again look at a river, or a dam, or a falling rain, without some sense of the vast and terrible quantities that move, mostly unseen and uncomprehended, through the world, and that we have, in this one place, gathered into our own trembling hands.